Picture this. Somewhere in what's now northern Kenya, roughly 100,000 years ago, the sun finally drops below the horizon, and instead of bringing relief, the heat just sort of hangs there, thick and stubborn, refusing to leave along with the daylight. A small group of early humans lies scattered across the ground near the mouth of a shallow cave, and every single one of them is wide awake, sweating, restless, staring up at a sky absolutely packed with stars because there's no light pollution to dim them. No fans, no ice, no cold showers, just heat, bodies, and the very real problem of needing to sleep anyway, because tomorrow means hunting, foraging, and walking. Miles under a sun that's about to make today look mild by comparison. If you've ever tossed and turned through a brutal summer night with a broken air conditioner, congratulations. You've experienced roughly 0% of what ancient humans dealt with as a permanent, unavoidable, year-round reality across enormous stretches of the planet. And that raises a genuinely fascinating question I couldn't stop thinking about once it crossed my mind. How did they actually manage it? Because sleep isn't optional. Your brain and body absolutely require it to function, to heal, to survive. So either ancient humans found real, effective solutions to sleeping through extreme heat, or they were walking around chronically sleep deprived for tens of thousands of years, which honestly seems like the kind of thing that would have been a serious evolutionary problem. Stick with me, because the answer involves architecture, biology, some seriously clever environmental tricks, and a surprising discovery about how differently ancient humans structured their nights compared to how we sleep today. By the end of this video, you might actually rethink how you deal with your own hot summer nights. Let's start with the biology, because understanding why heat wrecks sleep in the first place explains a lot about the problem ancient humans were actually up against. Your body's ability to fall and stay asleep is tightly linked to something called your core body temperature. As bedtime approaches, your internal temperature naturally starts dropping by around 1 to 2 degrees, and that drop is actually part of the signal your brain uses to trigger the release of melatonin, the hormone responsible for making you feel drowsy. Researchers studying sleep physiology have found this temperature dip isn't just correlated with sleep onset, it's mechanically involved in causing it, meaning if your environment is too hot for your body to cool down properly, you're fighting against your own internal signaling system just to fall asleep at all. This is why modern sleep researchers consistently point to a cooler room, somewhere in a range around 60 to 67 degrees Fahrenheit, as ideal for quality sleep, and why hot nights so reliably wreck sleep quality even when you're exhausted enough that falling asleep shouldn't be a problem. Heat doesn't just make falling asleep harder, it disrupts the deeper stages of sleep too, particularly REM sleep, since your body has a harder time regulating temperature during that stage compared to other sleep phases. So, ancient humans weren't just dealing with mild discomfort on hot nights. They were fighting a legitimate physiological battle against their own biology every single time temperatures refused to drop after sundown. Now, here's where things get interesting, because ancient humans, especially those living in consistently hot climates across Africa, the Middle East, and other tropical regions, weren't facing occasional heat waves the way many of us do today. For enormous populations across enormous stretches of history, heat wasn't a temporary inconvenience. It was the baseline, which means whatever sleep strategies they developed couldn't just be emergency workarounds. They had to be sustainable, everyday solutions capable of supporting normal, functional life indefinitely. The first major piece of this puzzle involves something so simple it's almost easy to overlook: shelter design. Long before anyone had a word for thermodynamics, ancient builders across numerous hot climate cultures were independently arriving at architectural solutions that modern engineers still study and respect today. Take traditional dwellings found across various hot regions of Africa and the Middle East, often built using thick mud, clay, or stone walls. These materials might sound like poor insulation choices at first glance, but they actually work through a principle called thermal mass, where dense material absorbs heat slowly throughout the day and releases it slowly at night, creating a significant lag between outdoor temperature swings and indoor conditions. A well-built mud or stone structure could stay noticeably cooler than the outside air throughout the scorching afternoon, and while it might release some stored warmth overnight, that release happened gradually enough to keep interior temperatures far more livable than sleeping fully exposed outdoors. Beyond material choice, ancient builders also figured out smart structural tricks for managing airflow, often without any formal understanding of physics beyond generations of accumulated trial and error. Structures with small, strategically placed openings near the ground and larger openings higher up created natural convection currents. Since hot air naturally rises and escapes through upper openings, while cooler air gets pulled in through lower ones, generating a constant, passive airflow requiring zero mechanical assistance. Some traditional Middle Eastern architecture took this even further with wind-catching towers, tall structures designed specifically to funnel outside breezes downward into living spaces below, functioning essentially as an ancient, entirely mechanical version of air conditioning, built purely from clever geometry and a deep, practical understanding of how air behaves. Sleeping locations within these structures mattered enormously too. Many hot climate traditional homes across various cultures were built with sleeping areas positioned partially underground or built into naturally cooler spaces like cellars, since soil itself acts as an excellent insulator, staying significantly cooler than surface air temperature even during the hottest parts of summer. Archaeological evidence from various hot region settlements shows shallow underground or semi-underground sleeping chambers appearing across surprisingly distant cultures. Another example of humans in similar climates independently arriving at strikingly similar solutions to the exact same problem, purely through repeated observation of what actually worked. It's worth pausing here to appreciate just how much collective observation must have gone into refining these designs over generations. Nobody built the perfect cooling structure on the first attempt. Someone built a shelter, noticed it stayed unbearably hot through the night, adjusted the wall thickness or the placement of an opening the following season, noticed a slight improvement, and passed that adjustment down. Multiply that slow trial and error process across hundreds of generations and dozens of independent cultures, and you end up with genuinely sophisticated passive cooling architecture developed without a single blueprint, textbook, or engineering degree involved anywhere in the process. Now let's talk about something equally important but often overlooked entirely: rooftop sleeping. Across an enormous range of hot climate cultures throughout history, from ancient Mesopotamia through various Mediterranean and Middle Eastern societies, sleeping on flat rooftops during hot months was an incredibly common practice. And the reasoning behind it is beautifully practical once you think it through. Heat rises and tends to pool in lower, enclosed spaces, especially once daytime warmth has fully saturated thick walls and packed earthen floors. Rooftops, by contrast, catch whatever breeze happens to be moving through the area, and radiate away accumulated heat far more efficiently once the sun goes down, especially under clear desert or Mediterranean skies, where nighttime heat loss into the open air happens rapidly. Historical texts and archaeological evidence from numerous ancient hot climate civilizations reference rooftop sleeping as such a normal, unremarkable part of daily life that it barely warranted special mention, precisely because it wasn't some rare workaround, it was just how you handled summer. This connects to something else worth mentioning. Many traditional hot climate cultures developed sophisticated understandings of when and where to sleep relative to the day's heat cycle, even without any formal scientific framework behind it. This brings us to one of the more fascinating pieces of this whole puzzle, involving something researchers call biphasic or even polyphasic sleep patterns. Essentially sleeping in more than one distinct block across a 24-hour period, rather than one continuous overnight stretch the way most modern people attempt to sleep today. In numerous hot climate cultures throughout history, and continuing in some traditional communities today, the hottest hours of early afternoon were treated not as productive work time, but as designated rest time, a practice widely recognized under names like siesta. Traditions found across Mediterranean and Latin American cultures, with strikingly similar practices documented across various hot regions of Africa, the Middle East, and Asia as well. Instead of forcing continuous activity straight through the punishing midday heat, entire communities would pause, retreat into cooler shaded or underground spaces, and rest or lightly sleep through the most brutal hours, then resume activity later once temperatures started easing during early evening. This wasn't laziness or cultural quirk without purpose, it was remarkably smart thermal management, essentially rescheduling human activity around the parts of the day when the environment made productive movement dangerous, given legitimate risks like heat exhaustion and heat stroke during peak afternoon temperatures. By the way, if you want to go even deeper into the secret lives of ancient humans, I just launched a full course called The Secret Lives of Ancient Humans. 10 modules, 3+ hours of content covering everything we never talk about on YouTube. What they feared, how they communicated, what hunted them, and much more. Plus an exclusive PDF guide included. Link in the description. See you inside. And crucially, this pattern meant nighttime sleep didn't necessarily need to be one single unbroken 8-hour block in order for someone to feel adequately rested, since a portion of daily rest had already been banked during that midday pause. There's actually broader historical evidence suggesting segmented sleep. Sleeping in 2 separate chunks with a period of wakefulness in between was far more common throughout much of human history than continuous, unbroken sleep, even outside of hot climate contexts. Historical records from various pre-industrial societies reference something like a first sleep and second sleep, with people waking naturally sometime in the middle of the night for an hour or so of quiet activity before returning to bed for a second stretch of rest. While this pattern wasn't necessarily driven exclusively by heat, it does suggest ancient humans generally had a much more flexible, adaptable relationship with sleep timing than the rigid, continuous 8-hour block modern culture treats as the only acceptable standard, which would have made adapting to heat-disrupted nights considerably more manageable than it would be for someone today whose entire sleep schedule depends on one uninterrupted stretch working perfectly. That waking window during the middle of the night, sometimes called the watch, apparently served practical purposes beyond simply waiting out residual heat. Historical accounts describe this time being used for quiet, low-energy tasks, tending a fire, checking on children, or even just lying awake in a kind of relaxed meditative state before drifting back into a second sleep phase. For hot climate populations especially, this natural break in the night may have offered a convenient opportunity to step outside, catch a cooler breeze, or reposition bedding away from a wall that had absorbed too much residual warmth, all without it registering as some frustrating sleep disruption the way a modern person might experience waking up at 3 in the morning drenched in sweat with work in a few hours. Now let's talk about clothing and bedding, because ancient humans in hot climates figured out something that modern people sometimes get backwards when they're desperately trying to cool down. Minimal, breathable coverage often beats no coverage at all. Loose, lightweight fabrics made from materials like linen, developed and refined across numerous hot climate ancient civilizations, actually help regulate body temperature more effectively than sleeping fully exposed. Since loose fabric traps a thin layer of air against the skin that helps buffer against extreme ambient heat while still allowing sweat to evaporate freely, which is the actual mechanism your body relies on for cooling itself down in the first place. Bedding across many hot region cultures similarly favored lightweight woven mats over heavy fabric coverings, allowing airflow to continue reaching the skin throughout the night rather than trapping heat against the body the way thicker bedding would. Sweat evaporation itself deserves a moment of appreciation here, because it's one of the most impressive cooling systems in the entire animal kingdom, and humans happen to be exceptionally good at it compared to most other mammals. Researchers studying human evolution point to our relatively hairless bodies, an unusually high concentration of sweat glands, as key adaptations that allowed early humans to remain active during intense heat far longer than most other animals, which were often forced to retreat into shade or become nocturnal instead. This same biological advantage that helped ancient humans hunt successfully during the hottest parts of the day also played directly into their nighttime survival strategy, since efficient sweat evaporation meant that even without modern cooling technology, the human body itself was already remarkably well equipped to shed excess heat, provided airflow was available to actually carry that evaporated moisture away rather than letting it sit stagnant against the skin. Water played an important role here too, beyond simply staying hydrated. Various hot climate cultures throughout history developed practices involving cooling the body directly before sleep, whether through bathing in cooler water sources during evening hours or applying wet cloths to pulse points like wrists, neck, and forehead, areas where blood vessels sit close to the skin surface, and cooling those specific areas can noticeably lower overall body temperature faster than trying to cool the entire body evenly. This is actually a principle modern cooling science still validates today, and it's a great example of ancient humans arriving at effective physiological solutions purely through repeated practical experience, long before anyone understood the underlying circulatory mechanisms involved. Diet even played a quiet supporting role in some traditional hot climate cultures, with lighter, cooler evening meals favored over heavy, calorie dense food close to bedtime, since digestion itself generates measurable metabolic heat. Communities that developed this pattern, whether consciously reasoned out or simply arrived at through generations of noticing they slept better on lighter stomachs, were essentially avoiding an unnecessary internal heat source stacking on top of an already brutal external one. A small adjustment that compounds meaningfully across an entire hot season. Community sleeping arrangements also played a surprisingly practical role in heat management that's easy to overlook if you're only thinking about individual comfort. While it might seem counterintuitive that sleeping near other warm bodies would help during hot weather, many traditional hot climate cultures actually organized their sleeping spaces to maximize shared airflow and shade coverage collectively, rather than each individual fending for themselves. Communal sleeping structures, often open-sided or featuring shared shaded courtyards, allowed entire groups to benefit from collectively engineered airflow patterns, shared cooling strategies like communal water use, and the simple practical advantage of built structures large enough to incorporate architectural cooling features that a single, small, individual shelter often couldn't achieve on its own. Geography and cultural adaptation also intersected in fascinating ways across different hot regions of the world. Populations living in extremely arid desert climates, where daytime heat is intense but nighttime temperatures can actually drop dramatically due to lack of humidity holding heat in the air, developed somewhat different strategies compared to populations in hot, humid tropical regions where nighttime temperatures often remain stubbornly high regardless of how clear the sky is. Desert-adapted communities frequently relied heavily on thick-walled structures because the dramatic day-to-night temperature swing meant those walls could absorb daytime heat and still cool down considerably by early morning, resetting the thermal cycle daily. Humid tropical communities, facing consistently high nighttime temperatures with little relief from radiational cooling, instead leaned more heavily into open, elevated structures maximizing airflow, since trapping heat in dense walls provided far less benefit when outdoor nighttime air wasn't cooling down significantly anyway. This regional variation is worth appreciating because it shows ancient humans weren't applying one single universal solution to heat management. They were running countless independent, localized experiments across different environmental conditions, refining architecture, clothing, sleep timing, and body cooling techniques specifically calibrated to their exact regional combination of humidity, temperature swing, and available building materials. That level of environmentally responsive problem solving, achieved without any centralized scientific institution coordinating the effort, represents an enormously impressive body of accumulated practical knowledge, built purely through generations of trial, failure, and gradual refinement passed down within each community. There's also something worth mentioning about seasonal migration patterns among certain ancient populations, particularly hunter-gatherer groups who weren't necessarily tied to permanent settlements the way agricultural societies eventually became. Some ancient populations living in regions with dramatic seasonal temperature shifts practiced deliberate seasonal movement, relocating to higher elevations or areas with more consistent shade and water access during the hottest months, then returning to lower elevations once temperatures moderated. This kind of geographic flexibility represents perhaps the most fundamental heat management strategy of all. Rather than engineering a fixed solution to fight against an unbearable environment, simply moving toward a more livable one whenever the option was available, a strategy modern settled populations, tied to permanent homes and jobs, obviously can't replicate nearly as easily today. Even body position during sleep seems to have mattered in ways worth mentioning. Traditional hot climate sleeping customs in several regions favored spreading out fully rather than curling up. maximizing the surface area of skin exposed to whatever airflow was available rather than conserving body heat the way a curled position would. This might sound obvious once stated outright, but it represents another small, cumulative adjustment layered on top of everything else. Another tiny gear in a much larger machine of accumulated heat survival knowledge that ancient communities built up and passed down without ever writing a single word of it into a manual. Putting all of this together, what emerges is an impressive, multi-layered system ancient humans developed for surviving and sleeping through extreme heat, involving smart architectural choices exploiting basic thermal physics, flexible and adaptive sleep scheduling built around the natural rhythm of daily temperature swings, clothing and bedding choices that worked with the body's natural cooling mechanisms rather than against them, direct physiological cooling techniques targeting key areas of the body, dietary adjustments reducing unnecessary internal heat, and in some cases, outright geographic relocation timed around seasonal heat patterns. None of this happened through formal scientific study. It emerged through countless generations of ordinary people paying close attention to what actually helped them sleep better, then passing that accumulated practical wisdom down to their children, who refined it further based on their own experience, in a process stretching across thousands of years and, in this pattern, across dozens of completely independent cultures scattered across the hottest regions of the planet. And honestly, there's something worth sitting with in how much of this ancient knowledge modern life has quietly discarded, mostly because air conditioning made it unnecessary to think about any of it anymore. We've traded thousands of years of accumulated, environmentally responsive wisdom about airflow, timing, and material science for a single mechanical solution that works brilliantly right up until the power goes out or the electricity bill becomes unaffordable, at which point most modern people find themselves considerably worse equipped to handle a hot night than someone living in a mud-walled structure with a flat rooftop and a flexible sleep schedule several thousand years ago ever was. So next time you're stuck sweating through a hot night with a broken fan or a stubborn heat wave your air conditioner can barely keep up with, maybe skip reaching immediately for your phone to complain about it, and instead try cracking a window open on two opposite sides of your space to actually generate real airflow, splashing cool water on your wrists and neck before lying back down, or just accepting that a short break of wakefulness in the middle of the night isn't some sleep failure worth panicking over. Ancient humans figured out how to survive and function through far worse heat than most of us will ever personally experience, using nothing but architecture, timing, and a genuinely impressive understanding of their own bodies, built entirely through patient observation passed down across countless sweaty, restless generations before you. If uncovering the surprisingly clever, overlooked solutions ancient humans engineered for problems we still deal with today is the kind of thing that keeps you hooked, there's a lot more of this rabbit hole worth exploring together. Let me know in the comments how you personally deal with a brutally hot night, because apparently your ancestors had some seriously underrated tricks that modern life somehow left behind, and I'll catch you in the next one.